Hey everyone, and welcome to the Tale Teller YouTube channel. Tonight, I've got 4 creepy and spine-tingling stories for you to drift off to. This video is completely ad-free, so you can relax without interruptions. I've also added gentle rain sounds to help you settle in and fall asleep peacefully. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more bedtime scares. All right, without wasting any more time, let's begin with our first story. Shortly after my son was born, my then husband and I bought a 100-year-old house for our expanding family, which included the 3 of us and our medium-large dog. As someone who grew up afraid of the dark after a strange incident with a neighbor boy looking in my windows as a child, I repeatedly had to tell myself that the creaks and thumps and sounds were normal for a house of that age, with old-growth trees that bumped the roof and scraped the windows at night, and noisy radiant heat, and a back gate that wouldn't stay shut and clanked in the wind. I'd hear something, and instead of investigating, I'd hide under the covers like any reasonable adult. When my then husband and I split up, I kept the creaky house, and he kept the medium-large dog. When my son was still small, the 2 of us were watching a movie in the front room around dusk when my phone died. As a Type B personality, the one charger I had was typically strewn somewhere about the house. This time, I found it in the kitchen, but as I crossed to the counter to plug it in, I had the overwhelming, goosebumpy, tingly, sinking sense that something was very, very wrong. I turned and I realized that not only was the back gate open again, someone was sitting cross-legged in the yard, seemingly staring at the house. They had a hood and dark sunglasses, despite the fleeting light, and didn't move even when I stepped closer to the window to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They remained eerily motionless when I was certain they could see me, and still even when I was pretty sure they could see that I had seen them. I quickly locked the back door, grabbed my phone and my charger, and headed into the dining room to my laptop, where I sent the first person I could see online a message that someone was sitting in my yard staring at my house, and that my phone was dead, and to please call the police if they didn't hear from me in a few minutes. I assumed whoever was in the yard would leave once sighted, but nevertheless waited on tenterhooks, impatiently staring at my still useless phone. After an awkward conversation with my son about why we weren't going to the kitchen to get a glass of water, it finally lit up and I was able to call 911. I tried to calmly explain to the dispatcher that I was sure the person was gone, but begged that they please send an officer to check my yard as the motionless staring was unsettling at best. Keeping me on the phone, she asked if I could look out a window without being seen to verify, as well as check the locked door. I awkwardly crept stealthily as I could toward the kitchen, slowly realizing that while the back door was locked, it also had a very clearly too large dog door with no functioning way to block it. Panicking, I stood slightly in an attempt to scan the yard and came face to face with a hood and sunglasses staring down at me through the window. At this point, I was incoherent as the dispatcher urged me to grab my son and hightail it to a locked room. I dart back to him and explain we need to go now, and as I pick him up, I hear the clear and unmistakable sound of the dog door slowly swinging open. I abandoned the house, leaving the front door wide open, and dashed across the street to pound on my neighbor's door.
Once inside, they kindly paused their dinner party to distract my son, while I stared across the street and messily sobbed about our very indoor cat we left behind. Not long after the officers arrived, they came through the side gate with hood and sunglasses in tow. They'd apprehended her calmly sitting on my back step, her arm lazily, purposefully swinging in and out of the dog door. I boarded the dog door shut that night, but we moved shortly thereafter, as I was never quite sure after that if all the nighttime knocks and bumps and open gates I'd been hearing were actually just the old house.
The woman who limped. Back in the late 2000s, I was in my early 20s and living happily for a few years as a broke expat in Berlin. One of my roommates, who was from the UK, and I were out late-ish, seeing a band, maybe around midnight or 1 a.m., and afterwards we were headed home, walking through a relatively central but quiet part of the city, towards a subway station entrance. We were in high spirits after a couple drinks and a fun night out. Not too drunk, just a little tipsy, and we were laughing and chatting, probably somewhat loudly, as we headed arm in arm towards the subway entrance, which was ahead of us, down at the far end of a long, quiet street. It was late October, early November, and still warm enough for it to feel nice to walk outside, and the misty air hung in yellow halos under the streetlights, just as a little gust of wind blew some leaves across the pavement in front of us. We both became aware of a figure walking ahead of us in the mist. From the back it lay.
My rural neighborhood is home to a large feral cat population, and I always keep food and water out for them on my deck. Last spring, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I sat down to pee and looked out the window, which is a clear view down over the deck. Looking down at the deck, I saw a large figure at one of the bowls. I was half asleep and it was quite dark, though there was some ambient light from our garage. And at first I thought it was a raccoon, or a giant skunk, or maybe even a coyote. Then, with the most skin-crawling sense of horror, I realized it was a human man crouched on all fours, eating cat food out of the bowl with his mouth. I whisper-yelled to my husband, with, I guess, enough panic in my voice that he immediately got up and came into the bathroom without asking why I was whisper-yelling for him at 2 a.m., and kind of spluttered and pointed out the window. He looked out, and I could see the same reaction play out over his face in the few seconds it took him to realize what was going on. It's a large cat. No, raccoon. No, coyote. No, WTF, it's a human. I called 911 and told the dispatcher there was a strange man on our porch acting suspiciously. "Ma'am," he said, "what do you mean, suspiciously?" I told him there was a guy eating cat food out of a bowl with his mouth, no hands, on the back deck. He said he'd send a patrol car right over. Meanwhile, my husband tiptoed downstairs to get a baseball bat from a closet, and I continued peeking out the window to keep an eye on the dude, barely believing what I was seeing. At some point, I suppose he must have stopped eating. There wasn't that much food out to begin with, and unless he was eating kibble by kibble, he would have finished very quickly. But he remained in the same hunched, crouched position over the bowl, the back of his head and his face obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt. Then, with the most skin-crawling sense of horror, I realized it was a human man crouched on all fours, eating cat food out of the bowl with his mouth. After what felt like hours, but was actually more like 5 or 6 minutes, we saw headlights approaching from down the road. Our visitor must have seen them too, because he got up easy as you please, walked off our deck, and disappeared into the shadows at the edge of the yard. We had a cruiser parked in our driveway for the rest of the night and the next morning, installed motion-activated lights and a camera. We took the cat food off the deck at night for the rest of the month. We haven't had an unwelcome visitor again, but I will always be afraid of looking out the window in the dark and seeing a man instead of a cat.
afternoon, I fell asleep on the couch while my little boy played on the floor. My husband was at night school, so it was just the two of us at home. At some point, I realized my son had stopped playing. He just stared at me. The air felt heavy, charged, and in my dream, as real as waking life, I was lying there, napping, when I felt him approaching. Stephen. I knew with absolute certainty that he was dead, and that he was coming towards us. Dread froze me where I lay. Through the window, I saw a shadow move up the driveway, a silhouette pausing at the frosted glass of our front door. My toddler looked up, smiled, and toddled toward it. I tried to call out, but no sound came. Stephen tilted his head at the sound of my son's babble, and somehow I found the strength to move. I gathered my son into my arms, clutching him tight. Inside, I pleaded, "I'm so sorry, Stephen, but please, please, I can't. Please go." His shoulders sagged. Slowly, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the garage. I startled awake. Everything was normal. My son sat on the rug, stacking blocks. The afternoon light spilled through the window. I picked up a book, trying to shake the weight of that dream. But after a moment, I noticed my son had stopped playing again. He was staring, eyes wide, at something I couldn't see. The air tightened. A faint ringing filled my ears. Then, a deafening crash, glass exploding. Our screen door had shattered for no reason at all.